unpacking the murky waters of bias and nuance in science and medicine from a dental health professional's perspective. That is today's show. Listening to the show live, you will know that we have brilliant partner offers to help you with your low-tox swaps. Enjoy these offers from Forest Superfoods and AusClimate. Lewis, hello. How are you doing?
Good, Alex. How are you?
I'm awesome, thank you. I'm really thrilled to have you back on the show, and I really love what we're talking about today. We are talking about things like, how do we research? How do health professionals research these days? How can we be curious without being suspicious of everything? How can we demand transparency without assuming everything that exists is bad? And other almost health philosophical topics, but you've just completed postgrad studies in Oxford where you've literally worked on this with a group of the world's best doctors who are able to get into this course. Can you talk to us about what you expected to learn out of such a postgrad undertaking and how it might have surprised you?
Yeah, sure. I studied evidence-based medicine and healthcare at Oxford, and I was fortunate to be in class with a whole range of excellent doctors, as you mentioned. We had neuroscientists, neurosurgeons, cardiologists, oncologists, psychiatrists. There was just a whole mix of us. So it was a really dynamic group in the sense that normally I'd be studying dentistry and very dental specific topics. But it was really interesting to sit down with other health professionals and talk about papers that didn't necessarily relate to what I have traditionally studied.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
Did you find that helped with objectivity when it had nothing to do with your field?
100%. So you're analysing a paper and you've got no bias because you've got no idea about any background. It's not in your background. So you look at a paper for what the paper is and you use the tools in which you should analyse a research paper without having, I believe this from my dental practice, or I believe that from what I've heard at a conference. It was just going in with really sort of clear eyes, which was quite interesting because then you can bring it across and try and alleviate some of your own biases.
And we have such deeply entrenched biases, whether we want to admit it or whether we're aware of it or not, right?
Yeah, 100%. We're all guilty of it. We're human. Part of being human is being biased, but to get the best results out of research, or what you can get out of research papers, is to try and leave that behind. So there's two aspects to that. One, when you're reading it, you have to obviously reduce the amount of sort of influence you have about your own opinions, because we're talking about trying to find facts rather than bringing in opinions. But also there's a whole catalogue. So over at Oxford, there's actually a whole catalogue of biases that they've compiled in order to minimise the amount of bias that goes into research. So there's actually the Oxford catalogue of bias, and they keep adding to it. Different research can have different types of biases within it, and then you're able to pick this out. So anyone can go on it. When you're reading a research paper, you can go to the Oxford Catalogue of Bias. I think at last count, they had 48 different type of biases that can be picked up on in research, and it's a really good website because it actually goes through each example, what it is, and it gives you an example. So there's something called hot stuff bias. So there might be a hot topic on something to do with health, and all of a sudden they're trying to sort of sway the research into a particular way to kind of suit the trend at the time. So there's so many different biases that can influence research. So that's important to know.
Wow, this hot stuff bias. I just want to unpack that for a sec, because my mind went two places. First place it went was I was interested to learn recently that the nutraceutical wellness industry, if you like, is actually 3 times the size of the pharmaceutical industry currently in dollars. And so I thought, gosh, hot stuff bias is huge in wellness. It's like, oh, we're all on the protein track right now, and we're all on the thyroid, and and then to create supplements to then capitalize on trend. Neurodivergence is obviously hot stuff. But then you have the double-edged sword, the sort of hot stuff where it's, thank gosh, this is actually being talked about finally, because it has either been taboo or under-resourced or underappreciated as something that is a challenge for a lot of people. But then the other side of that is oh my gosh, we're now trying to make every type of thing that relates to that about that, and therefore oversimplifying solutions.
Yeah, yeah.
So, wow. Okay. What are some of the other biases?
There's standard ones like confounding factors and all these sorts of stuff. Like literally, there's a really great resource for people to tap into, because even when I was analysing my research articles, I would just try and pick something out and just see if that sort of matched the biases. But yeah, it's a really good resource for people to tap into, and the examples are really simple.
Awesome.
And so anyone can look it up, and I mean, there's probably better things to do on your weekends or something, but like
with this community, you never know.
Yeah,
we're pretty nerdy.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. So I will definitely be putting that in the show notes. And so tell us more. What were some of the things that you were challenged by, or maybe kind of an aha that you had?
I think one thing is the reproducibility of studies, which is a real problem.
Yeah.
So, for example, there was a paper in Nature, which is a very high impact journal. I think they analysed about 1,500 studies, and the researchers, so scientists could only reproduce 76% of the results. So same setup, same experiment, same structure, different scientists. I think it was like 70% of researchers failed to actually reproduce the results that were in these studies. So 70% were not reproducible. And then even the same scientists, like repeating their research, 50% of those, even slightly more, couldn't be reproduced.
Whoa.
So that doesn't mean necessarily that none of it is valid. That's definitely not what I kind of want to suggest to people, because there's still, useful aspects to these sorts of studies. But it is an issue because there is definitely a reproducibility issue within research, and the ways around that is sort of a big topic, but it is something that people need to be aware of, because I think a lot of people, I suppose, that haven't gone into the depth of understanding research. A lot of people and a lot of health practitioners actually practice what we call reference-based medicine or reference-based healthcare, which is you have an idea about something and then you go and find a study to, you jump onto PubMed and you'll see an intro and a result and you go, see, I'm right, like I know. And this is what a lot of podcasts and a lot of medical practitioners, dental practitioners, health practitioners, moreover, and I'm not criticizing anybody because I've done that, but it is reference-based medicine as opposed to evidence-based medicine, which is looking at not only finding something that suits your argument, is the research supporting your argument truly valid to what you're trying to say? So
100%. I remember when I started putting together Golo Talks, it was 11, 12 years ago now. And I tried to find, because I'd actually looked up a university professor's guide to putting together good research so that I wasn't just going in. I tried to find multiple different years, different country teams. So if there was a Japanese paper and there was a UK paper and there was a German paper and it was across different years and they were all finding the same thing and calling for more research, or calling, having a consensus around something in a peer review, then that felt like that was more able to be said, okay, so we don't just put a question mark on this particular chemical, we actually know that's one to avoid. But this one, there's only one study and that team's saying, can we have a bit more research on this world, and then you haven't found any more, then you can say, well, there's one study that's shown this, but it is just the one study and it is quite a small one, so that's a maybe on that particular ingredient.
Yeah.
Is that where we're still at in terms of if a Joe Blow wants to go out there and try and build a case for or against things?
Yeah, I think that's a really good mentality to have, Alex. I think that's really commendable. And I think that even within that, there's a whole range of factors like what was the journal? Was it peer reviewed rigorously? How many people participated in the study? Is it reproducible? Have other people found the same things? What are the what's the statistical significance within the papers? How confident are they of the results being more likely to be true than not? There's so many things. I think what I would urge people not to do is to go, I've got this idea that I've read in something, which is great.
That someone I follow online has said, and I agree with.
Correct. Like, I think you have to look at each topic on its own merits. So I've got people that I think across the board are quite rigorous, but it's not as though I go into every single topic that they talk about and go, yeah, this is gospel. Because even within certain topics, even though they're generally a reliable source, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're always going to be, so I think that that's something that people should actually have in mind because, there's anti-vax or anti-fluoride or anti-whatever, or there's pro this, pro that, and you're like, hang on, this is not the way you should approach it. You should approach it on an individual basis. So, for example, a great example is the Cleveland Clinic in the United States just released a really big paper on the efficacy of the flu vaccine this season, right? So every season, season. And what it showed was that people that didn't receive this version of the flu vaccine for this particular strain, it wasn't effective. The people that were unvaccinated against the flu got less flu than the people that took the flu vaccine.
Wow.
So that's coming out of a big centre, respected centre. The study seems pretty, rigorous, big numbers and a respected clinic that doesn't really have anything to gain by saying that. And so it's interesting that there might have been other seasons where it was really effective for a certain population group. But in this particular one, it's shown to be less effective, or even the people that didn't receive it ended up with, less flu, which is the whole purpose of getting it. So you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, well, that's just my opinion now, because it might be different next year. It might have been different 5 years ago. It might have been very beneficial, but you got to look at things individually and,
Yeah, 100%. And in that case by case, it's almost like, especially with something like a flu vaccine, then are you saying it's important to reset and review the following year, given it is always about new strains and new developments of a potential vaccine?
Yeah, I just think that, the other result, the next year's result with the strain, with the population, with the exposure that they've had, that it might be a completely different result. And for that particular year, it might be very beneficial for the people working within that clinic as healthcare, because it was done on healthcare providers that are exposed to a lot of people. So it might be that next year's strain hasn't morphed into a particular, really, really sort of a different state that is basically rendering that current season vaccine as less effective than just not getting it at all. It might be completely the opposite next year.
Yeah, got it.
I just think that people need to stay on top of research if they can. And this means like doctors and dentists as well, because a lot of times we just give out recommendations that are based on something that's not that current, right? Or even the knowledge base of, what we thought 10 years ago might not have been updated,
Yeah.
So, I mean, that even speaks to, like, a lot of people don't realize if you go and read recommendations in healthcare, it might be about any topic in healthcare, the recommendations on whether it's heart or teeth or gut or whatever, the recommendations, it takes research 17 years on average to become a recommendation. So are you getting, is today's research recommendations based on today's research? Not necessarily, so we're often way behind, and that's another problem with research, is how do you actually speed it up to update it? But there's so much bureaucracy, red tape, peer reviewing to actually get that to be a shorter span of time so that people are actually getting, up-to-date information. Because it's only the select few that actually know how to read it and then read it regularly that can actually stay on top of the research so they're getting current. So people think they're getting current, but they're not necessarily getting current because general doctors' recommendations, general dental recommendations takes on average 15 to 17 years.
Wow. And that's why it's so important to have people who are prepared to take risks on what's pioneering as well, right? Like I know my own integrative doctor does not do any Medicare, kind of rebates or anything, but that flexibility allows her to chat to her patients, say, look, this is what we know now, this is what's coming out. We could try this. And then there's a bit more freedom there to explore and not wait for a procedural recommendation to come through. But there's a risk there as well, though, right? Because you can end up with some snake oil charlatan stuff going on there as well.
Yeah, and you can, I agree with you, but also there's also over medicalizing. So sometimes the latest and greatest test, for example, like a screening test for some condition, right? And it's the latest and greatest.
Oh, yeah, like some sort of $700 gut test that does like a bazillion things and it's just come out and it's hot and it's...
Yeah.
We're back onto hot stuff, gut health. And you've got the... Yeah. That must be the best.
Then you gather more information. It might have a whole lot of false positives. Then all of a sudden somebody takes this test and goes and gets MRIs or further testing and then gets put under the knife for something that didn't even need to happen. So there's also latest and greatest tests out there that might have high false positive rates, and then all of a sudden you're like, I didn't need to know that. I could have just gone about my life, but now that I know, I might have this chance that I've got this issue, therefore I need to go and explore what it is. So there's just countless examples of that throughout history, and I think it's important to understand that. Like I've seen it even myself, going in and having an MRI done and then finding something, and then all of a sudden, I need to go and investigate. Like I need to go and see this doctor, and then they put me in this test, and then you go down the line, and then at the end of it, it was nothing. And then so you're wasting resources, and then it's great to know things, but it's only great to know things if there's something that you can do about it,
Yeah.
So like, for example, one thing is like oral microbiome testing. Right. So a lot of patients come in and say to me, do you guys we get inquiries on our website, do you guys do oral microbiome testing? I'm like, we can definitely do oral microbiome testing for you. There's no problem with that if that's what you want to do, right? There's different strains of bacteria that we know are more conducive to producing gum disease and will leave you more susceptible to having, pretty rampant gum disease where you get bone loss, bone destruction, things like that. You need to see the dentist more regularly, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you can screen for that. And then I always ask my patients, what are you going to do with that information? That's my question. And they're like, I just want to know like whether or not, so in their mind, it's like, I want to know more, which is great. I'm not criticizing it. I want to know what's in my mouth and what bacteria live there and whether or not that can target treatment. But this day and age, the treatment is actually the same based on the older testing. Like if I just measure your gums and I measure the amount of inflammation, the amount of bleeding on probing when, the dentist puts the little probe in and measures pockets, if there's bleeding, if there's bone loss, all that stuff will determine how much I'm going to recommend that you come in for regular cleans. And I'm still going to give you the same advice on, what nutritionally you should do, what oral hygiene techniques you should do. So it doesn't really move the needle. It just might go, it's almost like a motivating tool, which is fine in and of itself. But it's actually not giving me any sort of change in
what you would do.
Exactly,
it's kind of like fitness trackers or Oura rings. Sometimes the data can create an obsession and an inaction and a fear for things that aren't actually that bad or that you're not actually going to be doing anything about. But it's more I have to have the data, I have to know the things. I think there's a bit of that in health. But if you use it as that's that's interesting. Yeah, I did feel a little bit more kind of sprightly today, and my HRV reflects that. Cool. There's like a healthy way to have a relationship with personal data, and a way that can kind of tip us into vigilance and hypervigilance that can actually have a greater negative impact than just actually getting on with healthy inputs, like the basic stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if it means that you'll be more motivated, then I would always recommend doing that. If you struggle with motivation, then I would always recommend, if you want to go and get an oral microbiome test, if it means that you're going to come in and see the hygienist and get your gums cleaned, which minimises your risk of systemic diseases, then of course be my guest. But if you're already a really diligent, cleaner, coming in for regular checks, things like that, and you're doing all the right things at home, you're like, well, there's not really anything that I can do more except you just got some information, which again is fine. Information is fine. But then you get into this whole, you see a lot of patients that are like worried but well, the worried but well crowd, that panic about everything. And then they're always looking for something external to kind of do or save them or what have you, which is another interesting sort of juxtaposition in this whole journey for me, because like I'm doing nitty-gritty scientific research analysis over at Oxford, but equally, like I still think that just on a more holistic, thinking more broadly aspect is that we so often turn to the external to get a result for our health. It's like what activity or what pill or what supplement or what medication can just make everything okay. But that's all fine. But you also, we're never good at like looking within. Like health is also within us. It's like, how can I understand myself like better? How can I be at peace with who I am and, be really calm about my health and let emotions wash over me and just observe yourself a bit more, like almost like this sort of ancient Buddhism type sort of mentality.
Agree. Yeah. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, there's just what you're about to say is we're just like hyper vigilant on like, something external must save me, or like I need to do X, Y, Z. I need to get all this knowledge and I need to, over medicalize myself. At the end of the day, like you do also have to look within health. There's a huge aspect to health that's within all of us.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's like we're stuck in a bit of a catch-22 with systems, societal systems that actually make us so stressed. The majority of people anyway, that, when you're really stressed, when your basic way of living, i.e. have a job, provide for family, is actually now not enough. And then you have most people having to do more, hustle more, get an extra job. Just like there's so much like of the safety net of that lovely post-World War II middle class robustness that is now evaporating. And we expect everyone to just, well, get your sunlight, get your fresh food, get your this. It's like, oh my God, that's actually not even enough anymore because I'm just so stressed. Or I don't even have the bandwidth to cook a meal because I've now got to get 2 jobs to put my kids through school or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think we actually ignore that in the wellness bubble online in the conversation, because that's actually really why most people are finding it really hard to be healthy.
Yeah, it's just overwhelming. And which speaks to what I was saying a little bit before, is like if you're going to do a test on somebody or you're going to find out information about someone's aspect of health, it's like as a clinician, I want to know that the test I'm putting them through is actually going to mean that the procedure that then follows up or the advice that then follows up is actually meaningful to that person's health. So a classic one in, I mentioned the oral microbiome testing. Like I've done it, like I just found it interesting. It wasn't like, oh my God, I'm just going to revolutionize my gum health because I know
everything has to change now.
Yeah. It's more that, it was a motivational and an interest thing for me. And like I said, we can always do that for patients that ever come and see our clinic. But then, like, revolutionary thing in dental has been like three-dimensional scanning instead of
Mm.
two-dimensional scanning. So I know that if I refer a patient for a three-dimensional scan because I want to see if there might be an infection, like it was a bit inconclusive, the test we run in the chair, I want some more information. I get access to like this amazing dental radiologist who's probably the most qualified person within dentistry. She's got like 10 degrees, and she'll write an essay like on every single tooth that sits in that three-dimensional scan. And we find stuff that we didn't even know was there, right? There might be a
Wow.
chronic infection that's been festering in somebody's jawbone for 10, 20 years, which is obviously a distraction to the immune system.
Mm.
And then we get this test done, and then I can actually do something about that to make that person healthier. So they're the types of tests that are useful. There are tests that are like, have high false positives, or they're, inaccurate, or just not reliable to actually get somebody into a better health scenario.
Yeah. And that's really about like really thinking about bang for your buck on your health dollars as well, because all of these things cost money.
Yeah, and then if you think about like even I think from an emission standpoint, I think 7% of Australian like carbon emissions is from healthcare and pharmaceuticals. So then you think you're getting the latest and greatest, and then you go and medicalize all these people that based on something that's very unreliable. So that was one of the things that I took at Oxford was actually diagnostic testing. That was one of my modules.
Mm.
And to actually work out what's a good test, what's not a good test, why is it a bad test, why wouldn't I use that test, and what are the ramifications if I use a test that's not reliable and then over medicalize somebody,
100%. Oh my gosh, I have an example on that. I remember when I was first going through the whole mold thing and
Mm.
the initial dark years where you're not sure if you could ever feel well again. And, there weren't enough resources for patients. And I remember getting the super expensive biotoxin test that you test your pee and you send it off to America and you find out what mycotoxins you've got in your pee. Now, we now know that that's probably not the best way to spend your health dollars because A, 500-600 bucks. B, do you live in a water damaged building or have you? Have you got all the mold illness, mold toxicity, mold allergy, or chronic inflammation symptoms? Tick, tick. Well, let's just actually spend that 600 bucks replacing the couch when you move house to somewhere cleaner, or, all the ways you could spend that money and actually just get to the process of detoxifying you and binding and, changing your biome for the better. Like, that's a lot of money to spend just to confirm what you technically diagnostically could already know from some decent basic questions.
Yeah.
Back to your oral microbiome testing and just looking at someone's gums and how much they bleed when you poke around.
Yeah.
Like health dollars and actually connecting with patients and asking questions can get you to answers often much faster. And to your point, now that we know the emissions price tag of it, with less of an energy burden as well.
Yeah, spot on. Like, great example.
Mm. Yeah, it's like, oh, yeah, there it is. The toxin that I know I have because there was water coming down my walls. It's just really not very useful. And I think maybe, do you think there's also a call there for health professionals to not get too excited by all the bells and whistles unless someone has that infinite budget patient that just wants it all because they can? But then I guess there's a hypervigilance risk with too much data as well that we've already talked about.
Yeah, I think that whenever when you're a health professional, I think you have to give pros and cons for things,
Mm.
and you have to put it back on the patient because you can guide them like to an extent. Often it's this is the pros and cons of doing X test. Do you understand the risks and what this could mean and the follow-up, what it involves and
Mm.
what that can mean to your anxiety levels or your costs or, how much you lay awake in bed at night. There's so many aspects that you need to discuss with people, but this is about holistic thinking. You can go, oh, I found this test, it's awesome, you should do it. But then what's the next question? Are there high false positives? Is it going to worry the patient? Does it over medicalize the patient? What do I, as a practitioner, what am I going to do for them? So I think pros, cons, risks, reward, cost, all has to be a conversation, and just like not tell them what to do, but just, get them involved in the process. That's all you can do.
Yeah, love that. Now, let's come back to the anti and pro, because I think that's really fascinating when we then consider research. Now, as you were joining Sydney Holistic Dental, you were already joining a practice where Ron Ehrlich, who of course is your uncle, and he had made a decision around fluoride in his practice already when you joined that team.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how did you then come to your own decision or parameters around fluoride in medical practice? And then I'm going to unpack it from a public health perspective, because I think this is a really interesting one. None of us have fluoride deficiencies in decay. Like, we know that much.
Mm.
But like, what else do we know? And how do you make a decision, especially if the country in which you're practicing has a dental association which might advise differently? What do you have freedom and agency in that system? And just talk us through it.
Yeah, I think that our practice philosophy is one that just, to me, makes a lot of sense, because if you're a health practitioner and you rely on dogma to make your decisions, well, it's a very, very easy way to practice dentistry or medicine.
Yeah.
So if you're not looking at the individual person that's sitting in front of you and making a decision on what's best for that person rather than your dogma, then I don't know that you're really doing anybody a favor. So it's actually a very easy way to practice. So if I said everybody needs fluoride, everybody should use a fluoride toothpaste, there's just no way that can be true. Like, just statistically speaking, there's just no way that could be true, right?
Does anybody need it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Who are they?
I mean, I've got patients I guess the thing to frame here, Alex, is that a lot of people go, oh, they're a holistic practice, they're anti this or anti that. We're not anti anything. We're about what can we do for the person that's sitting in front of me. And, for some people, I've got a patient who has had radiation to their salivary glands because they've had cancer in the mouth. And they've got no saliva whatsoever. So saliva is what neutralizes the acid. It protects your teeth from tooth decay. And if you don't have any of that because your salivary glands have been nuked, then you're going to get tooth decay. You've got a higher risk of tooth decay, I should say, if your diet and your oral hygiene isn't absolutely impeccable, which is almost impossible in the modern world. There's a few outliers, but it's not the norm, myself included. I had a feeling the other day, actually.
Did you?
Yeah.
Thank you for just admitting you're a regular human.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, for somebody like that, every time I see the guy, he's got tooth decay. So I need all the help I can get to make sure that guy doesn't have to sit in my chair every 6 months, spending money, time, pain, energy, anxiety in my chair. So I actually have him on the highest topical fluoride that I can possibly get my hands on.
Yeah.
But then I've got a patient who he's 45 years old, he's never had a hole in his life, he's never used a fluoride toothpaste, his diet's impeccable, his mouth is just, filled with saliva that's like of a pH that's really, really healthy. Who am I to say that you need to be on a fluoride toothpaste, So the evidence suggests, N of 1, that person does not need any changes whatsoever.
Yeah.
So this dogma is the problem.
The dogma is the problem in everything.
But it's the problem.
In everything. In religion, in medicine, dogma and ideology are always the problem. I can't say it enough. We need to be well read, we need to be well nuanced, and N equals 1, 100%. And so let's just talk about the situation that we have, where kids are often eating like vacuous, like crackers and chips and those kinds of snacks where the starch is sticking around in their teeth. What do we know of hydroxyapatite now for you to be able to say, well, that's actually going to be enough while we work on the lifestyle piece? Or should we still maybe in some cases be thinking, well, for that family, if we can't get those starchy meals and starchy snacks under control, then maybe a topical fluoride toothpaste is better for them for now. Like, how do we make those decisions or have those conversations as a dentist?
Yeah, I think that, again, it's case by case. I think there's not huge amounts of long-standing research on hydroxyapatite, so that's one of the disadvantages of something newer, you know? So, like I say, with if I do a lot of surgery, so like I say to patients, there's two options in placing a dental implant. There's one titanium and two ceramic or zirconia, which is metal-free. Right? So a lot of patients don't like the idea of having titanium in their mouth. And I say to them, look, the data on titanium is decades long. So I know I'm confident that in your particular situation, I can say that with some pretty good certainty that is going to be in your mouth, in healthy function, after this amount of years, etc. The data on, say, like a zirconia implant is not as widespread because there's not as many people studying it. There's less data in terms of the years it's been out on the market. So I'm like, can I guarantee that? You can never guarantee anything, but can I bet that this zirconia implant is going to be there in 30 years? I have no idea. I don't have a single ounce of data to say that. So then again, you go back to the patient. Here's the pros, here's the cons. Is it something that you want to do? Can you live with those risks? Can you understand what happens if it fails? And it's the same thing with hydroxyapatite. There's so many more studies on topical fluoride versus topical hydroxyapatite. But, in theory, it makes sense, right? Because your tooth is hydroxyapatite, you're putting hydroxyapatite back to give it the strength that it needs. And then fluoride works by creating fluorapatite, which is not hydroxyapatite, but it's very similar. So it actually makes it more acid resistant. So the mechanism is similar. The advantage that people see is that it's using something that's like for like. It's more like we've got it in our mouth anyway. So people like the idea of.
And it feels more natural, therefore, and probably is more natural.
Correct, yeah. So, I mean, personally, I use the hydrox, despite my filling. I use a hydroxyapatite toothpaste, and I have done for about 6 months or a year. But then there's like toothpaste that are also like nano hydroxyapatite, and then you're like, well, is the small nature, the nano nature of the particle going to be a problem with absorption into other tissues? So there's just so many things that you don't really know the answer for. So I would, again, it's boring, but I would say that it's case by case. Like I've got children that have no decay, their mouth looks healthy, their mum and dad feed them amazingly well. They don't mouth breathe, dry their saliva out, their lips are closed. There's all these different factors that increase the risk or not. And that's one of the parts of being holistic, is to actually individualize your treatment rather than being dogmatic, And I understand people's mentality, like a dentist mentality. Oh, give them a fluoride toothpaste because that's my job done. But is it enough? Is hydroxyapatite outperforming that? I think we have to wait and see. But I'm excited by it.
Yeah, it's definitely in hot stuff category, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I know you've said you just had a filling and you're still using hydroxyapatite, but I had 7 fillings after my pregnancy. Growing a 4.2 kilo baby, turns out he sucked the life out of me, literally, and every mineral I had. And so after he was born, I had those 7 fillings, and it was the first and last time I've ever had fillings. So it was very obviously related to a pregnancy shortfall in topping myself up. And that was also when I stopped using a fluoride toothpaste and switched to more whole foods, less snacks, and really getting those lifestyle inputs right. Haven't had a filling since, touch wood. And you've recently told me I don't have to worry about that anytime soon, which is great. So I think I so agree with your case by case and the permission to just explore what's going to be the best option for you for now. Because if we come back to the public health issue, this is where we get into something a bit murkier, which is fluoride in the water. murkier, pardon the pun. Like, we then end up with a government decision that makes a public health decision to either remove or put in. And then you don't have the choice to be case by case as much. I mean, of course, if you didn't want fluoride in there, you could get a filter. If you did feel like you needed more fluoride, you could use a higher topical solution as a workaround. So I guess there is freedom in that particular scenario. But what I find really interesting is when we take the fluoride out of water, like they did recently 10 years ago was it Calgary in Canada? I think it might have been Calgary. Please don't quote me on that. I will put it in the show notes so everyone has the correct information. They then saw a massive rise in dental decay. And I feel like we're missing the public health education piece. So you know how you just said, if I just, as a dentist, tell my patient to use a fluoride toothpaste, that's my job done. I feel like we do that sometimes in government policies. We put the fluoride in the water or we take it out. That's my job done. I've done what the people wanted. But if we don't bring education into what makes a healthy mouth, practices day to day, food recommendations, and we can't then provide and facilitate that, especially on the food piece, local, accessible, fresh, whole foods, then are we then removing the one piece of scaffolding that they had for their tooth decay situation? Like, I find it really interesting in Western A. Price's time. It was really obvious. It was the processed food people that had all the dental problems. It was the non-processed food people that didn't. But in modern day, not everybody has a choice to just simply move to processed food, to whole foods.
Yeah.
Either economically or access-wise.
Yeah, it's a really nuanced discussion. Just generally speaking, there was a Cochrane review, which is one of the leading research bodies in the world, and there was the recent summary on fluoride is that a lot of the fluoride recommendations for water fluoridation were actually based on 1975 or earlier, and a lot of those papers contained a lot of flaws, which they've now identified. Okay. And so I suppose what they've said in that Cochrane review as a general theme is that it's inconclusive on whether or not it's hugely beneficial in reducing the number of decayed, missing and filled teeth, so DMFTs. So that's an interesting paper if somebody wants to go and read that. That basically summarizes the latest research, and it's inconclusive, right? So, you know, in the dental field might be suggesting that it's the best thing ever, but that's just what you're taught. But if you actually go and dig into some of it, you know, it's not clear cut. So I think there needs to be some sort of conversation there. And then the other thing to remember is that fluoride outcompetes iodine, the thyroid, and there's a massive issue with thyroid disease, overactive, underactive worldwide. So there's another thing to think about. You can't look at a particular public health thing in isolation because it can also create other issues. So then there's the whole, you know, brain health, brain development piece as well. So then can you go, okay, so how can I get the benefits of fluoride without ingesting it and causing problems with thyroid or brain or what have you? So, and then even the research itself is inconclusive. But then the flip side to that is that, you know, I used to work in the Tasmanian public sector, right? I saw refugees, drug addicts, you name it, I saw it. Possibly the worst dental health you'd ever see. Like, it's not something that I see in the city at all. And so you're seeing them. They've been waiting 2.5 years to get in for an emergency appointment. Their face is the size of an apple because they've got a facial swelling. They come in with a bottle of Coke and a pack of cigarettes, and they've been doing meth on the weekend. And then, so I would argue that water fluoridation is the least of their problem. You know what I mean? It's like actually they might benefit from that, you know. Whereas like the people that criticize it, this is just playing devil's advocate, both sides. The people that criticize it might be sitting in the northern beaches or the eastern suburbs of Sydney.
This is what I was Exactly what I found interesting about the debate on this Canadian example, right? Because the people who will poo-poo the reintroduction of the fluoride are the people who probably don't need to worry about fluoride in the water as a potential single scaffolding for them and tooth decay protection, versus the people who are actually affected, like who you're talking about,
Yeah.
that like maybe that's the only thing they got.
Yeah, because and then a response to that might be, we'll just give them a fluoride toothpaste, and you're like, they're not brushing their teeth.
No,
So
this is exactly the thing.
so
Like, if you
this
can't, you've even shared with me that like people in your practice will often admit to just doing it once a day.
yeah. So again, it's a nuanced conversation because the research suggests it's inconclusive. There may be some benefits to minimizing tooth decay. It needs to be weighed up with systemic, unwanted results from it, like
Mm,
thyroid, brain, potentially IQ, versus a lot of people need just some protection because they're not brushing their teeth, they're drinking Coke, they're drug addicts, they don't have money, they can't eat organic, they don't even brush their teeth, so it's not even so it's a tough one. It's a tough one because it's a hugely, and I feel for sort of like I can kind of see why people become dogmatic because like I
mm.
said, it's just so simple to go, how can you be against water fluoridation or how can you be pro water fluoridation? You're like, hang on, there's like 20 different factors that you actually have to think about here and
Yeah.
actually do a pros versus cons. And in a way, healthcare is to make sure that the people the least fortunate are actually looked after.
100%. We are in a bubble if we think most of the things we're all tweaking and nitpicking in our lifestyles isn't actually a huge case of privilege to get to do so in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And then, that whole piece, any piece, kind of ties into conflicts of interest, which is also
Yes.
an interesting topic which we spoke about a lot over in Oxford. So conflicts of interest are just rampant in
Mm.
research. And again, a lot of people will go throw the baby out with the bathwater and go, you can't trust any research that's sponsored by X, Y, Z. For example,
Mm.
the TGA, which is obviously the Australian equivalent of the FDA,
Yeah.
like 96% of their budget is from industry.
Mm.
So that's a huge problem.
Massive. How do we fix that?
Well, I think over in Oxford, they've actually got a data. In many ways, it's interesting because in many ways, it's almost more transparent than it ever was because now there's like actually a database where you actually have to declare
Mm.
your conflicts of interest.
It's the
And then,
first place I go when I'm doing research, like that declaration at the bottom.
yeah, yeah. And so there's, in a way, more transparency, but on the other hand, there's almost never been more of their tentacles digging into it.
Mm.
So I think, obviously those sorts of databases are crucial, but equally, it's an interesting one when you think about, because we obviously talked about conducting research over at Oxford. And a lot of the people that actually provide the finances and the resources for the actual research studies are pharmaceutical companies, medical equipment companies. These are the ones that actually have the money to fund the research because there's a massive funding issue. If you can't finish a study, you can't do it properly, etc. So on the one hand, these companies can provide the resources that we need to get research. On the other hand, they can potentially influence things. So sometimes there's almost like no perfect answer because
Mm.
universities, for example, can't always fund the size of the studies that are required to get rigorous data. So it's a real minefield.
Yeah, and something that I was speaking to Gabriella Rosa about, who's doing her PhD in public health at Harvard as an international student, I might add, which is a very tricky time to be one of those. But she was actually stepping out what the removal of funding for universities means when the government stops funding the research. It actually creates a hotbed of further penetration of private industry funding the research because the scientists still want to do the research however they get to do it. That's all the scientist wants to do. And so
But there's
it's,
also pressure. There's also pressure to publish. That's the other thing.
Yes.
It's pressure to
Again,
publish.
something we talked about with Charles Piller on the Alzheimer's amyloid hypothesis, right? Everyone wants the race to the cure, and then the scientists feel overpressured to deliver on that and can sometimes end up doctoring research to look like the savior.
Yeah.
It's a huge issue. So there's a pressure piece, there's a funding piece. And if we look at Australia and the TGA, I didn't know it was as high as 96%. That's actually super frightening. Where is our systems breakdown in that becoming the reality that we now have? How did it get to be that?
I mean, I'm obviously no politician or drug company CEO, but I suspect that I think there's huge lobbying.
Mm,
So I think that you say what you just mentioned about your previous guest who said, if you pull out the government funding, but in a way, the government funding is so influenced by the
by
lobby,
lobby as well.
by
Yeah.
lobbying. So it's really, the tentacles are so embedded
Mm,
that it's a really tough one to kind of undo unless you kind of have a lot more, philanthropic or entrepreneurs that are really wealthy wanting to just go, here's money. I want you to just find the answer. I don't care about the result. Whereas
yeah.
like a
I
drug,
don't want to then create the product that then benefits from the results. That's the key piece, because we have a lot of rich people, super rich people who provide philanthropic funding, whether it's Bezos, whether it's Gates, whether it's, and then it's when they come around and actually profit from the findings that it makes it very hard for anyone to trust anything anymore.
yeah, and more and negative results are far less likely to be published versus
Yeah.
positive results. So there's a whole system there that needs work. But like I have to say, I'd have to give a mention to the head of the evidence-based medicine program over at Oxford, Carl Hennigan.
Mm.
And he's someone that I actually subscribe to his Substack, and I pay money for it because him and his offsider Tom Jefferson, they do a really, really good analysis of everything and hold governments and pharma companies that suggest a certain result has occurred. They really go in and critique it, and you can get an idea of how to think about things a little bit without the bias,
Yeah. It's so important. I mean, I think part of the problem is we're in headline culture instead of, like, people have even lost the ability to read a long form investigative piece. We just want the short, the sharp, the thing I can share with my mate, the thing I can sound like I know what I'm talking about as quickly as possible. And I agree. I think Substack is a brilliant tool to find scientists and doctors who are breaking things down in great detail.
Yeah, and that's another thing there that just reminds me, Alex, is the headline grabber is often the relative risk, not the absolute risk.
Ooh, break that down.
So for example, like a headline might say cancer drug improves outcomes by 50%, and that's what people see, right? Because they'll go, oh my God, 50%, this is amazing. But the absolute risk, you might have, one in 1,000 becomes 2 in 1,000. So it's 50%, right? But it's not really moving the needle that much, right?
Yeah.
So one in 1,000 benefit, now 2 in 1,000 benefit. But the relative improvement is,
His
50%.
998 people are still stuffed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is like a lot of the COVID studies were based on, we heard 95% efficacy. Well, this is again relative. It was relative, not absolute risk. That was often touted in the media. So it's often because they want to sell papers, and
Yeah.
often the media grabbing headline is not, an absolute risk reduction of, just as a random number, 0.05% doesn't sound as sexy as like a relative risk of, whatever it may be. It's
Gosh.
a headline grabber. So that's another thing that we went into in great detail. Was we would sit in class and we would look at newspaper headlines, and then we would look at the actual paper that they were actually writing about, and it was nothing like what they were saying.
We used to do that at uni as well. I did a media subject in political science, and you had to not, it wasn't scientific stuff, but it was political stuff. And you would have to look at the headline. You would have to look at the camera angle of the photo on how they portrayed the particular person they were writing about. You would then have to read the full article, underline the parts that led you to suppose that that might be left or right leaning, then find contradictory perspectives or points of view or evidence outside of that newspaper article that you were analysing. And it was the most fantastic subject for setting me up to have a flexible mind for life. And be curious but not suspicious always, and be interested but not decided. And like, I think a lot of people feel unsafe in that paradigm, but for me that is the greatest sense of safety, because I don't feel like I have to set up a camp only to find out that everything is untrue. Or, I think there's a lot of cult thinking in health these days. It might be the carnivore blogger that then has to come out and be, do their shame post on YouTube about having to have a salad, and, then everyone tears them down. Or the opposite of that is the vegan blogger who has to admit they felt called to eat a steak, and then they get torn down. And I just think, my gosh, those absolutes are tearing us apart, really.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's actually not the way a society moves forward. I think it's just curiosity, understanding, being thoughtful of others, and just kind of talk to each other with respect, and base everything on individual circumstances rather than just diving into a camp.
Yeah. Like, wouldn't that be great? And yet that's not where we are. So for you, Lewis, as someone who does that kind of study and then moves back into practice, has it changed anything about the way you practice or make decisions now?
Yeah, I think it makes me question what I do. And why I do it, because often health practitioners can have a way of doing things, and that's the way that they've been taught or the way that they've been mentored. And then now I go, okay, why do I do that? Or why did I recommend that? I should read into that. Or is that actually true? Or am I giving people my opinion rather than, based on more factual information? It just calls into question a lot of things. And some of the things have been really good. I've gone off and researched stuff and gone, that's why I do that. That's really, really good. And other times I've gone, I should change that up a bit because that's not, as rigorous or as tight as it should be. But also just from a patient standpoint, just going in and doing a general degree is like, obviously we look at things beyond the mouth at our clinic. And so me being able to read and give advice on different health aspects, not by any means do I suggest what somebody should do with their heart. Or that's not what I'm suggesting. But what I can do is go, I can read a bit about it and go, I actually know somebody that is an excellent cardiologist in that field that I recommend you go and see, or what have you. So you can just give like a bit more of a thorough, holistic service, So
that sounds like it's been super beneficial then.
Yeah, I mean, it was at times dry and very academically rigorous, like lots of late nights and, quite boring topics because it's not necessarily like I was doing one on influenza, I was doing one on penicillin, I was doing, just stuff that has diagnostic testing for, heart or blood pressure monitors or whatever, it's just got nothing to do with what I do really. But it was really, really good process because it can be applied to the things that I do.
Yeah, and there's nothing better than widening one's lens to be better with whatever specific you then are doing in your day-to-day. I think I always feel like I make the most amount of personal progress in quality of thinking when I step out and go wide for a bit and then go back in.
And just also hearing how other clinicians in class think about how they interact and use a decision tree for their patients. So it's just been really beneficial in that sense as well.
Nice. Can I ask you one more question around scientific debate between professionals? Because I think that's always an interesting one, and I'm pretty sure around the lunchroom during that degree there would have been a few debates. Or I think it's interesting you think about and you're thinking in your mind, gosh, I don't believe that, or I have a completely different point of view. How do you feel is an effective way, professional to professional, that regular people who have differing points of view could learn from to actually debate something constructively versus in an attack and respond kind of dynamic?
I think it's just mutual respect. It's just communication. If you have somebody that sees something in a different way, like we had numerous debates over there, I think it's just acknowledging their point of view, actually listening to what they have to say and taking away something that you could broaden your scope with. Even if you overall disagree with, there's always something that you can gain from somebody, you know?
Mm.
On like a topic that you don't agree with, there might be something within that that makes you think a little bit differently about that topic that you didn't otherwise think, and that's a massive win.
Yeah.
But I always think I know what I know. I always love listening. I love listening to people, you know, because I've already got my knowledge. You know, I'm talking to your guests now, and they might learn something from me because they don't have what's going on in my head, but I don't have what's going on inside your head. And I think that that's just such a great thing to kind of acknowledge, is like, Alex, I know for a fact that you know a stack of things that I don't know, you know. It's just the reality. It's just, doesn't matter whether you've gone to Oxford, Harvard, you've been a yoga teacher for 20 years. It doesn't matter who you are. There's always something to learn on perspective and outcome. And I think that we just need to be so much more open-minded rather than going in all guns blazing, like I know more. And you just pick up so much more if you don't talk about what you know all the time, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, for me, it's if you go in curious to learn versus going in insisting to win in any kind of debate, then you're actually going to get somewhere together.
Yeah.
Whereas insisting to win is the implication that you are there purely to create a winner and a loser in that dialogue. And that is never going to create progress, because there's always going to be as many people who disagree as there are who agree on pretty much anything.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a far better summary of what I just said.
But sometimes we have to kind of like get the murky stuff out to kind of refine it and bring it home. It's all good. Okay, final thing, just in terms of oral health, given you are a dentist, given you would describe yourself, I would say, as a holistic dentist, taking a lot more into account than the mouth, can you just remind us, Lewis, what we should really be focused on when the internet can tell us all sorts of things, the most important things to cultivate oral health in a quick, like, here's what we know for sure?
Yeah, I think brushing really well, flossing really well, going in for regular cleans and checks, because pain isn't a good barometer of whether something's wrong in the mouth. So people go, I'm not in pain. And, you know, if your cardiologist said, I'll come back when you're in pain, you could have a blocked artery and you know, you're not in pain, but you still got a problem. And that's the case with a lot of oral diseases. Like I've seen oral cancers that have no pain, zero pain, and the patient's in huge trouble. Making sure you're coming in regularly. Don't use pain as a barometer. I would say make sure you're you're breathing through your nose. Nasal breathing is important. Mouth breathing drives the saliva, and then you don't have that neutralizing effect in the mouth. I would say then there's just some other additional things. I mean, obviously, it's a disease of diet often decays. Would my ancestors recognize this as food? If the answer is yes, you should probably eat it. If it's no, you should probably put it down. So I'm just eating really clean at the moment. I feel better systemically. My mouth feels better. There's less inflammation. I'm not getting any bleeding, blah, blah, blah. And then there's sort of some lower hanging fruit, which is obviously like staying hydrated. So most people don't drink enough water, keep their mouth hydrated. And then little things like if you've got an acidity problem, a little bit of aluminium-free bicarb soda into a cup of water, pop it in.
Like a little bit, meaning a pinch? Or
yeah, just a teaspoon into a cup of water, and then swish it around your mouth for a minute. That actually makes your mouth more basic and less likely to get tooth erosion, tooth decay. So that's a good little tip.
Can I say on that one, as someone who really loves sparkling water, and I know that can be not so great from an acidity perspective, if I've had a session, it's just like I'm so low tox. It's like this would normally be someone saying, if I've had a few wines, I'm saying if I've had a few sparkling waters,
I'm the same.
A big night, could I do a bicarb rinse to kind of level things back up in there?
Yep.
Is that
Anybody could, like wine.
Or
Yeah,
if you really love fresh citrus in soda water as your drink of choice.
yeah. I've got a patient who's got the worst reflux ever, like just
Mm.
destroying his teeth. He needs a full mouth rehabilitation.
Ugh.
Poor guy. He's on bicarb rinses every day for a minute.
Right. That is, I feel like that's a great little bit of gold.
But aluminium free. You
Of
got to get it
course.
aluminium free.
Yeah, because gums are the pathway to the body.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And I feel like that was a really good what we know for sure. Nice. Thanks. And then we've
No
got those
worries.
amazing FAQs that we did a few years ago that I actually listened back to share with someone recently that was so comprehensive on everything that people would ask a holistic dentist. So I'm going to add those to the show notes as well. Thank you, Lewis, for joining me once again on the show. This one was way less definitive and here's what we have to do, but that was like exactly the point. I think we all need to get a lot comfier in the fact that we don't know everything for sure and we just need to do the best we can. Trusted health professionals who are open to exploring all options and really listening before taking action. So we really appreciate that you've gone off and done that for yourself to the benefit of everybody in the practice and now for the benefit of everyone listening. I hope you loved today's show as much as I loved bringing it to you. I want to remind you that if you are someone who craves a low tox community that is judgment-free, full of empowerment, has health professionals and building health professionals that can support you, as well as me in there answering questions multiple times a week, I want to invite you to join the Low Tox Club. For the price of less than a cup of coffee a month, you have an annual membership for $49 Australian, so it's about $30 US or euro, that allows you to have a member masterclass every single month with a health professional or global expert from the podcast where we have them to ourselves for an hour to ask questions and deep dive further. You have the beautiful supportive chat group. You have Q&As with me answering questions. We read books and talk about them and a whole bunch more. You can head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the explore tab and join the club is the very first option on that list. Of course, we have over 10 evergreen courses that you can jump into anytime, whether it's navigating everyday low tox swaps with our Go Low Tox signature course, whether you have kids and you're wanting to know how to best support them with our Low Tox Kids course, whether you're planning a family and looking at a healthy low tox preconception journey, reducing inflammation, especially the chronic kind, with our Inflammation Ninja course, many other courses. You can again head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the courses tab, and you'll see all of the options, which includes a business course, my Low Tox Method program. A lot of people don't know, but I was doing a lot before starting Low Tox Life in 2009, and I was a business consultant across hospitality, health, retail, and cosmetics. I have been in business consulting for a very long time, so I absolutely adore helping people move into the low tox space or develop their low tox businesses. So that's a way I can support you. And then, of course, there's our wonderful social media communities at Low Tox Life on Instagram, and of course, the website with over 250 gluten-free recipes, blogs, downloadable PDFs to help you navigate wanting to get rid of synthetic fragrances in your school or office. I could go on. So head to lowtoxlife.com, see what takes your interest or fancy, and thank you so much for being a part of our podcast community. I love reading your reviews. I appreciate every follow and subscribe, and I want to just remind you to finish off that if there's anything you heard that you found interesting from a medical or scientific perspective, it is intended as education only. Please always chat to a health professional who knows you and your situation best. I'll see you next week. Bye.